Beautiful. Today I am solo, but I'm hoping that you guys can help me out with some questions that come up along the way. So please feel free to put in your questions in the chat or follow up afterwards. But today's topic, it's like Sammy mentioned, it's part 4 in the CDP series. This has been a really fun series of webinars. I feel like I've been hearing some good feedback from folks who are referencing some discussions points that we're having. But also it's been a lot of fun for me to put together some of this content. So I'm excited to bring this together today. I have a few slides that I'm going to walk through just to frame the discussion, but then we'll dive into them in more depth as we go. Let's just take a step back on the CDP journey so far. So going back to what this webinar series, the way I thought of it was, this should help any client, any of you who is in a different stage within their CDP journey. So this is where we started with part 1 when it came to the RFP process and selection. This is something where the CDP is a big investment. It's also what I would say it's a disruptor within organizations, because it does touch every aspect of your org. Not only the marketer is going to leverage it, but it's going to be fueled by data architecturally, depending on how you want to utilize the CDP. It also impacts how, as a whole, your enterprise solutions are set up. So it really, it's an important step to take, and it's important to select the right CDP. There is many of them out there. They all vary in sizes, in capabilities. The underlying layer is the same, but there's a lot more details. So I always recommend, if you're able and you have the time, to go through the RFP process. So in the first webinar, we go through that. We'll talk about how to do the selection, what are the things to look for, how to prepare for it. And I'm hoping this helps you in understanding the process there, so that if you are pursuing an RFP, at least you know where to start. In the second part of this series, we kind of even took a different approach. We said, well, one of the things that always come up is we get to this question or this dilemma of saying, wait a minute, do we need an CDP? We heard about it. I went to a conference, or my boss went to a conference, or they got a sales pitch about a CDP. You need a CDP, but then we ask ourselves the question: do we need one? So in that second part webinar, I talked a little bit more about whether a CDP is needed and how do you know that you need one. We had a guest for that one, Vino Palayor from BJ's, who just recently went through a CDP implementation, and he gives his own perspective on how did they came to the point that they decided they needed a CDP and how they went about implementing it. And the part 3 of this series was what to expect during implementation. Implementation of a CDP can be chaotic, can be a lot of work. In some cases, I've seen as a system integrator who implements a lot of these CDPs, I've seen a gap where the clients were not clear on what do they need to do to prep. So in that webinar, we talked through preparation from data, from technology, but also from people that sets you on the right path for a successful implementation. And then one of the latest webinars that Nats and Alex in Softcrylic presented last week was the pre-CDP concept. And I thought that was a topic that is a bit confusing for people, because the perception is that a CDP is where your identity is managed, where all your data is sitting. And this is where you can use it as a CRM, and you can use it as audiences, and you can use it as an activation. But in reality is like you're asking way too much from a CDP. Not to say that CDPs cannot do a lot of these, but it can get really expensive and hard to manage. And end of the day, also, you are putting a lot on a CDP that can impact performance. So this is where Nats and Alex talked about why you should think about a pre-CDP environment. This can scale up or down depending on what you're trying to do. But this way, there's value. There's value for you to retain the data, value for you to be able to separate what is important for the company as a whole versus what is important for marketers. So all of these webinars, in addition to other webinars we've done over the past years, are all on our website. So if you go to softcrylic.com/insights, there's recaps and there's also recording of them. Feel free to review any of these. So in today's webinar, though, what we're going to talk about is the transitioning. This is the time where you finished up the implementation, and now you are ready for saying, okay, I'm good to go. I have the CDP up and running. Now I'm ready to graduate to that level, what I would call phase 6, being post-implementation. So if we take a look at that transitioning period, let's look at what happens, a quick refresher of what happens during implementation. So this is where implementation, we usually think of it as 4 to 5 phases, depending on how you want to classify it. But typically, it's a kickoff that takes place with your system integrator. And then you jump directly into define, or what we call discovery. This is aligning on the use cases, aligning on what is the goal of this project, documenting what we're going to be creating. And then phase 3 is where we start designing. This is start building the data models and what is it going to look like based on the use cases, based on the data that's available. Phase 4 is where after things are tested and validated in a staging environment, now we're ready to take this to the next step and move this to production and then start executing. And then phase 5 is pretty much the wrap up. This is where we're enabling your team. We're finalizing any playbooks or runbooks and just saying, okay, here's signing up the paperwork. You're good to go. So phase 6 is when typically you are on your own, or in some cases you might be with either getting additional help. But a lot of clients I see, this is the time where they say, okay, give me this platform back and I'll take it from here. So what happens during this time? In phase 6, in the in transitioning, there's this expectations idea and there is the reality. Let's go through expectations. Expectations meaning you as the client, what you expect to do in that phase. And reality is what you will likely run into. We are fortunate to see both sides, and that's why I wanted to give you that perspective. So from an expectations, now you executed 1 to 2, maybe multiple use cases with your CDP, and now you're ready to execute more. So you're expecting walking into phase 6 is to execute more use cases. You're also expecting to build segments associated with these use cases and expanding on more segmentation. You're expecting to activate to the destinations you enabled. You're expecting to start democratizing and promoting the CDP and showcasing, hey guys, we have a CDP, we have data in there, we have segmentation, we're able to activate on these channels. There's all this fun stuff. This is the value that we unlocked. But also you're also expecting to measure the impact. Like what kind of impact did the CDP have on your business, on your campaigns? How much did it help you in reducing, for example, the manual labor, or allowing you to speed up your go-to-market? From there, you're also expecting to build new business cases to get more data. Initially, probably during the implementation phase, you were limited with the data you used because you had limited use cases. But now you are ready to do more. So you want to get more data brought in. You will likely want to integrate with other systems, maybe more destinations or more data sources. And also, end of the day, you just want to see this CDP bringing you more value to your business. This is the expectations. This is what probably the sales team will sell you on. This is what you walk in wanting. But here's what, in majority of the cases, this is what happens. Reality. The reality is you rush through the implementation because time is of an essence. Campaign need to go out on live, real world. So you end up facing some data discrepancies where data that is showing up in the CDP might not be matching the number of along with in other systems. I'll give you an example. If you have your, let's say, your member number, let's say the emailable or the accessible member number. Let's say in your data warehouse, you have about 1 million, and the CDP you're seeing 1.2 million. There's a discrepancy. Why is that happening? That would be something you might run into when you go live. One thing that happens all the time is this lack of ownership in the CDP. So we knew during implementation who was the business lead, but since implementation is 3 to 4, maybe sometimes 6 months, depending on what kind of things we face along the way, we get to a point where that business lead during implementation is now moving to a different project, or in some cases, just transitioning to a different role, promoted within the company. So there is this reality that happens that you might end up having the CDP ready to go, but it doesn't have ownership. No one is standing behind it, driving the next steps with it. Also, the reality is, because this is new to your company, you might not have a lot of new use cases to execute. The use cases that were in the repository initially at the time you started the implementation might not be any more applicable, or might not be as not only applicable, but they're not as a top priority for your company. So then you're kind of stuck with, okay, what do we do with it now? One thing also you will face is that measurement of the success of a CDP is limited because the CDP has on its own, it's not an analytics platform. It's not a visualization platform. It's an activation. It's not meant to give you the readout of lift of how much more orders you got because you activated this audience at these places. But there is ways to drive measurement, but not within the CDP. Also, that ties to value realization. For you to measure the value of the CDP can be difficult in reality. So you might be faced with that, expecting that, hey, I should be able to see how the value that the CDP is providing, but then it's really hard to measure in that platform. The other piece is burnout from implementation. And this is a typical thing that happens whenever there is big projects where the CDP implementation takes months, there's a lot of back and forth to QA and validate. And by the time you finish up that and you go live, and now you're to the next phase, this phase 6, you want to, the folks who were initially running the implementation might be a little burned out from using the CDP, and it's a little bit of a demotivation for them. So keep that in mind, that could happen. That also leads to a limited adaptability, very similar to what we said, that since you don't have ownership, you don't have people championing this internally, that might be a problem. And then the biggest thing that no one expects, but it does happen, is you start running into some overages and overages in the data, because initially you might have planned, we all forecast to say, we have X million members, and then we have this amount of site visitors we're going to bring into the CDP. And then all of a sudden our audience grows, and now we are beyond our forecasting. So then you are faced with a reality that you have a platform that has a lot more audiences that you wanted or that you contracted for, and you are now in a 2 to 3 year deal with the vendor, and you're over your profiles. So where do you concentrate? So you might end up concentrating a lot on limiting and driving down your profile usage, while in reality, you're not getting the good value out of the CDP because you're not able to execute on the other things. You're just trying to make sure you're within your contracted terms. So with that being said, now that we know what is the reality and we know that it is not always the best, I'm sorry, I'm not meaning to say like reality is always bad, but these are some of the things. Of course, there's always benefit and value, but there is certain things that we don't plan for that happen. And my goal here is to tell you how to make sure you don't end up with such a terrible reality, but end up with a happy ending. So in here, the reality, let's take each one of these on why this happened and what could be the reason that led us to get there. So one of them, the first one, was data discrepancy. And the data discrepancy, I would say this is something that likely happened because you did not do enough quality assurance and testing during implementation. And this often happens because you are limited on resources, you're limited on timeline. This is complex. There's a lot of people. It might be during the holiday season. There's other campaigns, other priorities. So you might sign off on saying, okay, you know what? It's within the 10%. I'm okay with it. Make sure, I would say, early on during implementation to prepare for proper QA and give yourself enough time, prepare your resources so that you don't end up with a data discrepancy when you are in phase 6. And that reality becomes that there's no data discrepancy, or if there is, you're okay working with it. It's not it's very controllable. The other piece is no ownership. So this is where the ownership piece, the reason that you get to no ownership is gap in the transition preparedness. If you remember in phase 5, which is the value realization, there is one of the main things that your SI should help you with is preparing for transition. Actually, I would say, I'll encourage you to think about preparing for transition earlier. I would put it in phase, even in the design phase, because in the design phase, the SI is doing a lot of the work. You're kind of chilling as a client, waiting to see what the design is going to come back with. Take that time to start thinking about, okay, now we understand what are the use cases. We learned a little more about the CDP. We have some training coming up soon. How do we prepare for us to take this over? So that having that discussion early in the process will help you in knowing who is owning what once we get to this phase. The other piece is limited new use cases. I would say this is probably a combination of things. One of them is the gap in ownership, because if no one is owning this, then no one is driving to come up with new use cases. So that becomes now the domino effect. You're not going to get new use cases if there's no one behind them pushing for them. When it comes to no measurement and no value realization, this is where I would say it's a combination between understanding the product and also planning and transitioning. My suggestion here, so that there is no surprises, is for you to identify early on, how are you going to measure the success? How is this going to be connecting, for example, the CDP to another analytics tool, or having an export of this data back into your own data warehouse where you have your own visualization product that you want to do the measurement. But whatever it is, make sure you have that planned early on. When you are planning the use cases, one of the things that you should be planning is, how do I measure the KPIs? How do I measure the business that we hit the business objective? Where does this measurement need to happen? So do that early on. The burnout from implementation, I think this is also related to planning and transitioning. So if we plan this properly in how we're going to prepare to transition, we should be clear on, this is the people who were part of the implementation team who would be taking over once this team is done with their work. Typically, the people running and operating the CDP are not going to be the same people that have implemented it from your side. Yes, you do have a system integrator that is doing the heavy lift, but if you attended any of our previous webinars, we stress that you play a role to direct them and help them through that. But that team that you have assigned might not be necessarily the one that will be running and operating. So think about what's going to be that transition, so that you don't have someone who has been on the project for 6 months and is going to be on it for the next year, where this might cause them just being fatigued from working with this tool in such a maybe intense environment, because there's a lot of expectations out of the CDP. Finally, between limited adaptability and overages with profile usage, I would say this is related to poor planning. What I would recommend is early on, also in implementation, think through what is the most important thing? What is the priority? Is the priority to get the data and then worry about overages later? That could be a play, because in a way, okay, I know if my problem is I have too many audiences to work with, that's a kind of a good problem to have. But it really depends on the context. If most of this audience is a device level audience and they are cookies from the website, not known customers, then that might not be good for me. So prioritize what's important and plan for it properly, so that when you get into that phase and you do have an overage, for example, in profile usage, you know that that's okay. And you don't have to spend any time on trying to figure out how to control that, how to delete audiences, how to limit data coming in, which can be very much time consuming and takes away from the true usage of the CDP. All right, so how do we escape reality? How do we not run into this where we're having these problems that I just listed? So it was a little depressing, but let's look at the fun part and look at the optimistic part that we can get out of this. And for that, I would say there's 4 things that I would recommend you to concentrate on that will help you in preparing for taking over. And we're going to go through each of them in detail. But one of them is early readiness. Preparing for this early on in the process is critical. 2, defining ownership. Who is owning what? And being very clear about it. Like, who is from marketing? Who is from IT? Who is from the data teams, data engineering? Define who owns that platform. Assign accountability, because otherwise this will become something shared by different entities, and if it's not clear on who's accountable for what part of their share of the product, then nothing will be done. And finally, set the right goals and expectations. Don't be optimistic and be driven to set some high goals, but things that are within reach, not things that are sending us for disappointment. So early readiness. What would I do if I were you to prepare for this, so that I'm faced with a fun reality and a very powerful CDP at the time that you take it over? Start planning for this during implementation. One of the main things that I've seen, and it has worked out very well for my clients, is thinking through what is going to be the new way of doing things. I'm going to give you an example. The example is, let's say today you have a campaign that you're running, and let's say this is a campaign, it's a multi-channel campaign where we are collecting data about our members. Then we are identifying how many of these members made the purchase in this last X amount of days, let's say last 30 days, how many of them, what is their preferred channel, and then we are splitting them into some that we go after them on social, some of them we go after them on email, some of them we do site personalization. Before the CDP, you had a way to do it. You had a way to do it where someone, John Smith was pulling the list of this audience from this database, providing it to someone in operations, loading it into your marketing automation. Someone was doing QA with this data. There's a process. I'm positive you have a process for it. Now, think about, and do this early. Think about, okay, when the CDP is in place, how this process is going to change. Is John Smith is going to be the person pulling that data, or this data is going to be available in the CDP? So what would that be the new plan of executing the same campaign? That is very powerful exercise because it starts connecting what the dream is to what reality is going to be. The dream is that the CDP is going to come and magically solve the problems. Reality is the CDP is going to enhance and enable you to do more things. But myself, other folks within your team are not going to believe it until they see it. So map it out. Map it out on what would that be. Socialize it within your organization. Let people weigh in to say, wait a second. So now I still have to manage this piece. I thought the CDP takes care of it. Have that discussion, and then by the time you get to that phase of taking over the CDP, you've already ironed out a lot of these details, and you now know how we're going to do things. Also, a byproduct of this is that because of these discussions, you're going to figure out what's going to be the CDP team look like, and what are the resources that are needed. So obviously, I would say during the implementation phase, leverage your SI to talk to them about, hey, by the way, like you guys are setting up now the schema, or you're setting up these tables and these segments. Who do you think is the best person to do this when we want to do this in the future? We're going to go through training, right? That's great. But then who are the people I should bring in? Should I bring in someone super technical to manage this? Or do I have someone from my team who is a jack of all trades that can be, let's say, the CDP day-to-day specialist? Have these conversations with your SI, have these conversations with your internal teams, and then start mapping out what is going to be the CDP team look like. Now, if I were you, I'll be asking the question, Jerry, you're saying, do this, but who is doing this? Well, my advice would be, this will be a combined effort between your program manager as well as your business lead, or I would say the CDP owner during implementation. Typically, it's the marketing lead, unless this is within IT, but a combination of these two, because on one hand, you're taking into account what the marketers want later on, and then on another hand, what would be the right process, right? So program manager is coming up with the process and the cadence, and then the marketing lead is understanding what are the marketing needs. Put them together, now you have the combination of how this will run post-implementation. The other piece is ownership. And this is where I highly recommend to put a name to the person who's going to be the CDP person. This can be a combination of folks, but there should be one single point of accountability and ownership. This is someone who is saying, yes, we will do this in the CDP, or no, the CDP is not going to do this. It's important to do that because otherwise it will be chaotic. In addition to an ownership for the CDP, your cliche COE and steering committee. We hear that all the time. As a consultant, that's probably half of my job, is helping clients to figure out how to do the proper center of excellence and steering committee. But honestly, if there was one place that you need that, you need it in the CDP, mainly because it does touch every part of your organization. So have an executive steering committee that is a combination of your marketing, of your IT, and then anything else in between, depending on how you are structured as an organization. I would even put legal part on that steering committee. If you are in financial services or healthcare, the CDP is going to be managing some really important information, whether it's PII or HIPAA compliant. So you want to have some input from your steering or visibility from steering committee on how this is being handled. And then have your center of excellence that could be sitting on that panel is your CDP owner, and along with maybe the folks in the field that are consumers of the data coming from the CDP, as well as the people in the data warehouses that are managing and prepping this data. So those, in addition to maybe the data scientists that are understanding and trying to figure out, here's what the marketers want, here's what the CDP can do, and here's what the data is. How can I come in and help? Whether the data scientists decide to say, I'm going to go into the CDP and leverage the CDP AI functionality to do some of the modeling, or that doesn't work for me. I'm just going to do the modeling outside and pump it into the CDP and make it available to my marketers. But do have that structure. Think about what would that look like. And again, this is not an easy process. You're talking about personalities. You're talking about people might not be the biggest fans of each other or believe in each other. And they don't usually work on this or sit on the same table. This is the time to start working on that relationship, the team building, the connection between these teams, because during implementation, there would be a lot of work together. It's a good opportunity to expand that into post implementation. This is where maybe the center of excellence and the partnership will pay off dividends if this is done properly from the beginning. Okay, goals and expectations. And I think this is where folks think that if the plans that were set early on when we acquired the CDP and started building it are the same plans when we go live. It's never is. I mean, I don't think we got hit by COVID a few years ago, and obviously that impacted everything. We have a hurricane going through South Florida today that is going to impact probably a lot of the business that we do. So it's never, the goals and expectations are all going to change. So my recommendation here is, as you are in the implementation phase, internally think through, okay, we're getting close to wrapping up. We have another 30 days. This is where we are. We have campaigns about to run. What are we going to do after we go live? What is our initiative for the first 30 days, 60 days, 6 months, and a year, and depending how much you want to go, but what's going to be our plan once this is done, once we take this over? This plan can be, initially very basic, but have a plan in place. Don't transition and go into like crickets. We don't know what we're doing. Push for having a plan in place. I would say, I would recommend that the program manager from your side, who is helping during the implementation phase, is thinking about what is going to be the plan post implementation. The program manager doesn't have to be part of the post implementation and the go live, but they, given their knowledge of how the project is going and seeing how things are working, they can provide their input. And then this can set the precedence for what is going to be the roadmap and maybe phase one of the roadmap and the priority. So set that, I would say socialize it within your organization and make sure that everyone, the COE and the steering committee, they're aligned with that so that you can hit the ground running after implementation. The other piece is the program cadence. This is where, as you set the goals and expectations, also set with what's going to happen once now we're live. How many times are we meeting? What are these meetings about? There might be meetings for the steering committee. There might be meetings for training, enablement, meetings related to measuring the success, or looking back and doing a retrospective on how well did this campaign perform. We brought this audience, we built this segment in the CDP, we activated it on Facebook, we activated it on site, and we did measurements and we found that this audience was not the right fit. What do we change? How do we change it? So as you can see, there's different levels of meetings that need to happen, but be proactive in figuring out what would be the cadence for that going into that phase. Okay, probably this is the last one. Yes, this is the last one. So the last one is accountability, and this is where I can't stress enough on how important it is to come up with a RACI structure. A RACI structure, you will probably have something, you should have something like this during the implementation, but it's even more important during post-implementation. So accountability here, what I would encourage you to do is come up with what are the main folks that you expect to play a role, part of the CDP up and run and operate. This is at a time where this varies, really. This varies on, one, what you're trying to do with it. This varies on your skill set within your organization, and also how fast you want to grow that program. But typically, these are the main characters, right? You have data architects, data engineers, marketing operations, CDP specialists, creative, and enterprise architecture. Somewhere in between them, probably like a PM, somewhere in there. Go through what are the expected day-to-day activities. What are the example activities that you can put in here? And then based on that, understand who is responsible for what, who needs to be accountable, who needs to be informed. And then at that point, identify, like, do I have enough people to do this? Do I need more help? You can always, obviously, hire people, or you can rely on agencies like Softcrylic or your system integrator to come in and help you in saying, I need a data architect for a period of time because I don't have the technical skill set. Or I need someone hands on keyboard building segments. Or I need someone who is maintaining the platform. Figure out what are the things that you need, and then who is going to do them. And if that person that is going to do them is someone who is available within your organization or not. All right. This is I think all I have for you. Again, before I see there's a question, I'll get to it in a second. But I would say as a summary for this discussion, if you would take one thing or two things away from this webinar. One is start the planning process early. That's one. And two, identify what is going to be, who's going to be doing what. Those two things, if you can start on those early, then you are on the right track to have a very good run and operate and usage out of these CDP post implementation. All right, let me see. I think there's one question here. Let me take it here. Marketing operations seems to be a new group in many organizations responsible for CDP success. What is your experience with marketing operations? Okay, so marketing operations vary in terms of what they do. I've seen marketing operations in some companies where they're responsible for maintaining the data for marketing initiatives. So these are the people that are cutting lists from the EDW, loading it into the marketing automation tool, or these are people who are building the marketing workflows, and it varies, right? What I would say when it comes to the CDP, I would look at, and this has happened numerous times. I've seen, as we brought in the CDP into an organization where it's limited or it doesn't need the cutting of the list and the big data, like continuous data pulling and such, because you already connected the data and it's flowing into a system and it's closer to the marketers. What you can do is graduate the marketing operations to be now players within your CDP space, where they move from being folks who are running SQL and doing sizing to now building audiences and maybe doing some advanced SQL within the platform, within the CDP, to help you in understanding, is this the right audience to go after? If I'm trying to see, like, give me the people who are living in San Diego today. Instead of going into asking a marketing operation to source that data and send it to you, you might either ask them to create a segment or query it directly within the platform. And then from there, they are empowering it with the data, and then they can activate on it. They can say, you can say, okay, push this audience to my email and my ESP. And it's basically just selecting the destination as being the ESP and pushing it there. And then they might be involved in ingesting it into the ESP. But as you can see, what happens is they graduate in their in the role they do today. It's important to say that the CDP is a very technical product. It's very powerful, but it's technical. It does make the life of a marketer easier, and it brings data closer to your fingertips and all that fun stuff. But for that data to be very well organized and suitable for you to use, you do need some operations in place to ensure that. So I would say, look at them to be graduating in the program and bring them in, not take them off, right? Like, I wouldn't think about marketing operations disappearing, but instead growing with the way you're modernizing your product. I hope that answers your question. All right, that's all I got for you guys. I hope you took something from this webinar. Thank you again for being on this journey with the previous 4 webinars. We are looking to have one more, hopefully before end of the year. Planning to bring in some fun guests in, so that you're not only hearing me talk, but I have others that on the client side who have implemented this and who are in a position of maybe running and operating this, what they're doing, what are they facing, how are they escaping that ugly reality I showed initially, and how are they getting the most value out of their CDP. Again, thank you so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you soon.